everybody. Today, we are going to be talking about the state of security in DeFi because if you've been around this space for any amount of time, I'm sure you'll have noticed that there are some security risks and there are some hacks and there are things that happen. So, today, that's what we're going to be discussing what the state is and potentially what can be done about it so that it doesn't stay this way. And I'm with Stefan, who is one of the co founders of Oak Security and one of the managing directors of Solidified, also. He has a lot of experience. So, Stefan, if you could maybe give us just a very brief introduction to your experience so that people know who you are, and then we'll get into the state of DeFi security.
Sure, yes. So I've been in distributed systems since 2004, and since 2017, I'm looking at the security of smart contracts and blockchains. Obviously, back when I started, blockchains weren't a thing, but they became a thing at some point. And what we do now is look at security of these systems.
Awesome. And what would you say, if you had to give a bit of an overview, what would you say is the current state of security in DeFi at the moment?
Yeah, so we obviously see as security auditors, we see a lot of DeFi systems, and I have to say that the state of DeFi security is quite worrying up to some point. There are a lot of hacks, as everyone knows. Twitter is full of hack announcements, and millions are lost almost on a weekly basis. And some of this might be unavoidable, but a lot of it is, right? So there is a bit of a poor culture of security still, even so it might have gotten slightly better since the big DeFi summer a couple of years ago, but it still lacks a lot of basic security.
And do you have any sense of why? Is it that security isn't being prioritized because of other, the nature of blockchain and smart contracts?
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of reasons. I mean, obviously, there's this notion of startup culture and revolutionizing the finance system, and people are want to have something more agile than the traditional finance system. But what they don't realize is that the traditional finance system, for some parts, has a lack of agility for a reason, and a lot of this is to do with doing things properly and security and other things. So the other reason is that a lot of these things are experimental. They are new things, and no one knows how to do them properly. But a big part is also lack of security culture in the teams developing for blockchains, smart contracts, and a certain rush to get to the market as quick as possible without focusing on things like testing, best practices, and just taking the time to do things properly.
And would you be able to share some examples of, not to call out any projects or anything like that, but just some standout examples that maybe could have been prevented that have happened?
Yeah, I mean, there's one example that I always use in my talks, and it's a few months old, so it's not new, but it's a good example, and things haven't changed that much. So there was a project that deployed a set of smart contracts on a Tuesday evening. Um, by the Wednesday afternoon, so less than a day later, there were $580 million locked in these smart contracts. Um, on the same evening, Wednesday evening, someone discovered a bug in the smart contracts, which led to a price collapse. And by Thursday, basically, the money was gone and the project was dead, which is obviously quite worrying and not in anyone's interest. It's of course an extreme example, but there are many examples where more money disappeared down the drain because of things like this. Maybe in a slightly different timeline, but it's not that unusual.
And how would you compare this to? I mean, you did touch on financial institutions. Like, my question has often been, is it just that blockchain is so transparent that we're aware of everything that happens, whereas banks can keep things behind the scenes? Is this kind of an anomaly that really should be cut down on?
Well, it's both. I mean, obviously there are. It is experimental and it's transparent. So the traditional finance system obviously has the advantage that everything is behind locked doors. So a lot of software issues in banking software might never become public or publicly exploitable because nobody has access to the source code. Whereas on the blockchain, all the transactions are completely visible to anyone, and the source code in most cases as well. And if not, you can easily get to it or to a version of the source code. So um, that's obviously one part of it. But the other thing traditional finance does better, they have this culture of security, and they treat financial software as critical software. So um, it's more likely to NASA developing a piece of software to fly a rocket somewhere than a startup launching a new web product. Uh, and unfortunately, DeFi and many of the blockchain projects use the latter agile approach to software development. It's like you can have a prototype, and if it fails, it doesn't matter. But that doesn't work when we are talking about millions. So the traditional finance system has experience since the 60s or earlier even to write financial software. And we even see today in a lot of smart contracts, we audit errors that were well known in the 60s, 70s. They're not unique to smart
Hmm.
contracts, and they traditional engineers are well aware of them and have procedures in place to prevent them.
And moving on from that, would you share a bit more about what you would say is the correct mindset to approach, this work when you are building things that are going to hold millions of dollars worth of money?
Yeah, so if you're building a protocol that moves around millions of dollars, the first thing to realize is that you are building financial software, which is critical software. And if you're a financial software, it's not good enough to be a really good computer scientist or developer. You need financial expertise. So the first step is to get domain expertise, right? So if you're building an economic protocol, get an economist on your team. Get someone who knows about finances, who knows these protocols, who can think about edge cases you might not have considered. Um, the second step is to, once you come up with your economic model or the model of your DeFi protocol, specify it, document it. Right, it's impossible for engineers to implement the right thing if they are not if they don't have some way of referring to the model and having it explained in a very clear way. We very often in audits find protocols that have formulas implemented the wrong way simply because the developers were not aware what the real formula should be. It's specified poorly or in the wrong place or not at all. Then the third thing to do is to just slow down the development cycle. Um, there is a rush to market, and everyone wants to be the first, and I get that. But it is financial software. There are proper quality assurance things that should be done, and these take their time, which leads me to the next point, which is testing. Testing is extremely important, and it should consist in a number of things. So usually there should be unit tests for each operation the protocol is able to perform. So each unit of code should have unit tests associated with this, and these unit tests should cover all the branches and functions in the code. Um, and I should do that in a way that makes sense. You should think about edge cases, not just write tests for the sake of it. There have to be tests that make sense. Then there have to be integration tests. How these units work together should be tested in a certain way. And in the end of it, there should be some form of end user testing, preferably with end users that uh, that are not from the team, that are unbiased and external, because they might use the system in a completely unexpected way. A lot of bugs are due to the fact that people expect software to be used in a
Mm,
certain way, and because they've written it themselves, that for them that's obviously the normal way to use it, but for a user it might not be. And then the next step would be to just keep the software as simple as possible. We find a lot of complexity in our audits, unnecessary complex patterns, sometimes motivated by trying to save gas or being efficient. But complexity is always an enemy of security. So keeping the code as simple as possible and the protocol as simple as possible makes a lot of sense. Sometimes you can think of one tiny feature that might be used occasionally by someone, but it quadruples the complexity
mm.
of the whole system, and it's not just not worth it. So keep these things simple. And then the last point would be to think in incremental releases and incremental innovations. A lot of these protocols try to develop very big protocols and launch everything at the same time. Uh, that's often a recipe for disaster. And and if there's an existing protocol that works well, but you want to add a little feature, just don't reinvent the wheel. Just take the original protocol or implement it in the same way, fork it, or depending on licenses, obviously, or whatever, and build on it incrementally. You don't just try to revolutionize the whole market in one step. That's also a big risk, obviously.
Awesome, thank you. Um, and could you share some best practices? I'm thinking as well more in terms of maybe operational security, and especially for founders who are not developers themselves. How could they approach this if they have no idea what the developer is even talking about?
Yeah, I mean, best practices are start very early, and even when you get your team together. As I said, you should make sure you have domain expertise on the team, but then you need to get developers, obviously, and which developer you choose for someone who's not a developer can be quite difficult. And these days, it's quite normal to work with people across the internet that you've never met, and you have to make sure you can trust them, and the way they are developing and what they're developing, and that there are no backdoors, and even that they have the right skill set, is difficult to assess. So you have to be careful where you get your team from and who you trust. That's the first step. Then you need secure development practices. So you have keys that are used for testing, and you have separate keys for deployment. The deployment keys should be very well managed. There should be a policy in place who has access. It shouldn't be just one person. It should preferably be a multi-sig scenario for any important admin key or deployment key. That sort of information shouldn't be with someone on the other side of the world who you don't really know in person. Um, Most developers are trustworthy, but it might not be the case. Then, when it comes to documentation and testing, there should be practices in place, standards. Make sure first the model is sound, right? So if you have an economic model, get someone to review that. Make sure it's written down. Think about edge cases. What happens if you throw very large numbers at your protocol? What happens if you throw very small numbers at your protocol? What happens to precision when you throw high numbers and small numbers at the same time at the protocol, for example, in extreme exchange rates and things like this? Um, think about how the model can be gamed, misaligned incentives, and things like this, and external factors. And then there must be procedures in place to refer back to this specification that you've hopefully documented somewhere, um, because it's very easy to implement something completely different without even realizing, right? So you have these famous photographs, spot the difference, and there are eight small differences or whatever, and that's quite common between specification and implementation. Um, that's sort of in terms of best practices before you even start. um, During development, that there's, as I said before, testing is important. So use a test-driven approach where where the tests drive your development. Develop the unit tests as you write the code, or even before that. But that's several methodologies and several ways of doing that. Each have their advantages, but just pick one. you have to you don't have to do everything, but you have to pick one methodology and stick to it. Then obviously get an audit, get auditors involved as early as possible, and then at some point you get to deploy, and there the operational security is again very important. Make sure you don't leak any keys. Make sure the important keys are safe. Think about how you store them, who manages them, and most importantly, have a plan B or an emergency plan. Don't know what to call that. A policy, a protocol that is executed if something does go wrong.
Mm.
What happens if a key is compromised? How do we change this? Who gets the new key? How it is distributed? How is the old key revoked? That sort of thing. What happens in case of a hack? Who do we have to notify? Can we stop things? If there's no plan in place, it'll be very difficult when it comes to executing such a thing.
Thank you. And would you speak a bit about composability? Because obviously this has really grown, and there's only so much that you can do, I suppose, when you're relying on another project. But how would you advise teams to approach that?
Yeah, I mean, composability means that DeFi protocols are used like building blocks to build new things, or are used in conjunction with another. And people don't realize how widespread this is, and even if they interact with a protocol, that they might not know
Mm.
that they are in fact interacting with a lot of things, like any lending protocol or any DEX or any most DeFi protocols use stable coins, which are run by companies, USDC, USDT, and they are upgradable smart contracts. So, to give you a small example, if USDT or USDC decided to upgrade their contracts to charge a small fee, which there's no suggestion they will do that, but it could be possible in theory, a lot of DeFi protocols would just break because they don't expect that. So and obviously if something goes wrong in one DeFi protocol, that can cascade to others, and that has caused quite a few issues in the past. Um, so the way to deal with that is to program very defensively. Don't trust any external call, right? So for example, if you're calling a ERC20 token interaction, just a token transfer, don't make any assumption on how that token might operate. It might charge a fee. It might not return what it should. It might do something completely different. It might be an ERC 777 version that has some sort of callback that could cause you a reentrancy problem. These are just small examples, so don't even if you know the external code, treat it as suspicious. Um, if you are allowing people to register any tokens to work with your protocol, you have to be aware that these tokens might be fraudulent. There might be copycat tokens, or there might be just strange ERC20 implementations, or just malicious implementations. So if you do that, there's a limit of what you can do. The alternative is to whitelist tokens, which obviously means some sort of governance control. Um, but it's just to be aware of these things, warn your users about it, and let's say Uniswap 2 allowed all tokens to be registered for a pool, and at some point they became very good at making their users aware of this, and making sure they actually interacted with the correct token. So these are important steps to just be aware of the problem, treat external protocols as suspicious, and inform your users about it.
Awesome. And could we move on to talking a bit more about audits? So, I mean, I've heard you say a few times before, but that people treat audits as kind of the final cherry on the top often. Could you talk a little bit about what would be, I suppose, a more useful or a safer way to approach audits, security firms, maybe security consulting, so that it's not just a stamp at the end, but it can really be something that improves the quality of the space?
Yeah, I mean, an audit should not be seen as a drum that everyone has to go through like a stamp. It should be seen as a process, and obviously, we are auditors and we want people to hire us, but we also want them to hire our competition, right? So we encourage people to get more than one security provider and cover get a wider coverage. So get several audits would be the right step at different stages, and also talk to the auditing firms or security firms as early as possible. There are many things we can do even in the idea
Hmm.
stage just to help you define the protocol in a safer way. There are things we can teach you about operational security, about how to set up certain development best practices, and and apart from all this, we encourage uh, companies or protocols to approach us as early as possible because of the waiting times. We might not get an auditing firm or reputable auditing firm on a 1 month's notice. You might have to book them well in advance. So yeah, the main takeaway from this should be to talk to us as early as possible.
And is there such a thing as too early, or it just means that the work of that we offer will be slightly different depending on the stage?
Well, obviously that there is too early in that before you know what you want to do and you don't have any money, then there's no point. But other than that, there's no too early, right? So you have an idea and you want to write a protocol, and you have some idea on how this protocol should look like. That's already a good point to talk to us. We might not get active straight away, but we'll certainly have some advice. And we do offer consulting services at this stage, even economic consulting on how to design a protocol safely. If that is desired and within budget, we can do that. But even if the protocol does not want to do that, it still makes sense to have a call with us, get on the same page, and get some early feedback.
Awesome. That is everything that I had to ask. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you wanted to mention before we wrap up?
Um, no, I think that's almost everything. Maybe just to add, don't just think of security as smart contract security. There are a lot of things around that need to be considered, like uh, these days a lot of funds move over bridges.
Mm.
A lot of protocols implement on relatively new blockchains where certain issues might occur. So think about these things as well, and we do provide services beyond smart contracts for anything related to blockchain code and cryptography. So things that interact with the blockchain, wallets, bridges, even the blockchain protocols themselves are something we can look at.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Stefan. And everybody, if you would like to find out more
Okay,
about
thanks.
what we offer and how you can, get some advice and some audits, for everything EVM, you can check out solidified.io. And for non-EVM, Solana, Cosmos, etc., you can check out oaksecurity.io as well. So thank you very much.